high performers, they're competitive, they're driven. And then here's what I would just say, and this goes back to a little bit, ties into your coaching question, but I think there's like a level above high performer. And if you're going back to, this is a way I think as a CEO or anybody, you could challenge yourself. Like, I want to be a meta performer, which means not only am I going to win, I'm going to bring the people around me to that higher level too. And the only way you're going to do that is to ask them the probing questions to help them grow. One step beyond that is I'm going to bring the rest of the team, because then, the only way you're going to bring the team is if you get them to think differently.
Welcome to the Learn It All podcast, the show for today's leaders who want to get ahead and stay ahead, because we believe great leaders aren't born or made. We are always in the making. I'm your host, Damon Lemby, two-time best-selling author and CEO of Learn It, a live learning platform that has helped upskill over 2 million people. In just a moment, I'm going to be joined by Ken Gavranovic. Now, Ken is a seasoned technology executive. He's a global keynote speaker, and he's a member of Thinkers 50. Ken built web.com from scratch to over $200 million in revenue. He's led 18 exits, owned $3 billion in P&L, and scaled products at places like New Relic and Cox Automotive. And we're going to be discussing things like why he believes that outcomes over activity is so important. We'll talk about why he thinks that money doesn't make you happy, but it does give you options, how AI will be the great equalizer, and why you'll learn more at a failed startup in 1 year than a Fortune 500 in 10. You've built companies, scaled teams, and reinvented yourself so many times. What's like the first question you ask yourself whenever you decide to start something new?
Well, I think that's changed over time. That's going to be completely transparent. We talked about the origin state earlier. I think that probably earlier in my career, it was, does this seem like it's fun and financial upside? I think, as you have more choices and you've had some success, then it's a lot more, are these the people I want to work with? And do I think this is going to be enjoyable? And then maybe the potential financial upsides on the backside of that. So I think that shifts with time and kind of where you're at, generally speaking.
And when you first started, what inspired you to be an entrepreneur? And what were those questions you were asking yourself back then?
Yeah, Damon, this would be a good question because you've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs. So I'm curious if you see the pattern that I've seen, because I've been blessed to meet people that have private jets, and a lot of times I like asking what their origin story is, and different stories, and I'll share a couple. But I think one of the things that I've seen is a pretty common theme is sometimes a not great childhood. Maybe there was love or whatever, but oftentimes there's stuff missing, whether it be that's functional. And so I grew up, half brother was murdered, some, just not great things to happen as a kid. And I didn't really realize how much that motivated me, but I was kind of like, wow, that's not exciting. And I remember as a kid visiting a friend that was, I didn't realize was wealthy at that time. And we were doing something fun, and the mom said to my friend and me, "Hey, put whatever you want in the basket." And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Just whatever you want in the basket, because that's not how I grew up. So, my goal was like, I want to have choices, because money, as we both know, doesn't make you happy, but it does give you choices to do different things with it. And so I would say, like, I didn't quite realize it, but I think that scarcity as a child really drove me and said, okay, well, what can I do? How can I have financial success? And so it really just drove me to work really, really, really hard, and look for opportunities, right? Because when you're scrappy, you're the thing that somebody else might earn, that somebody else looks at like lemons, you're like, hey, how can I make lemonade with that? And so, when I was in my 20s, started lots of, I'll call it first and second base businesses, but I didn't even know how to ask for ownership. So I was literally in a couple of partnerships where I made other people $10 million. And, in one example, I made $2 million for somebody, and I think I made $50,000, and I was like early 20s, and they're like, kid, you probably make more than your parents. So I just didn't know how to ask. Luckily, when I lived in New York, so I started off in Texas, lived in New York, and met this guy who came to me, and he's like, wow, you're a really young, smart guy. Whatever you want to do, I'm going to give you half the business. I'm going to sign it. It's a guy named Bud Goldman. I still remember, give him credit. And so he was the first one that kind of gave me that equity opportunity. Fast forward, this crazy thing called the internet was coming. I was down in South Florida, and I was like, this is going to be huge. Every business is going to run their business on the internet, which at that point was actually controversial. It's probably my late 20s. Started a business, grew really quickly. And, by the time I was 29, I built a business to $200 million from revenue, 600 employees, and was blessed to actually go through the IPO process. Because as you know, a lot of times, when you're a founder, you don't make it through the venture. At some point you sometimes get replaced, especially when you're in your 20s. It's a lot more common now. Wasn't so common when I was doing that originally. But to answer your question, I think, one of the things real interesting is the origin story for a lot of people is like, what was your childhood? And it's amazing how much that drives a lot of the business success and drive. And I don't know if you've seen that with some of your other guests.
Well, I have. And what I hear you saying is, your childhood made you look at it and say, look, I want to get there, right? I want to get money. So maybe money will equal to success. But, what you found out, it adds a lot of options. I was fortunate, grew up a big real estate family. And kind of like you mentioned, around a lot of families who had private jets and planes, but a lot of them were also super miserable. And I think that was because, look, I was really lucky. My dad was my best friend, and he was always there for us. And he taught us right and wrong and work ethic and everything. But a lot of his buddies were narcissists or just workers, and they just never paid attention to their family. And so things kind of turned out miserably. And I look at some of them and they reflect back on what they would have done differently and had better relationships over time. So I think there's a lot of interesting ways to look at things like that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Because like when I was, in my 20s, I was like, if I made a certain amount, then of course I'm going to be happy. And then I actually hit that amount and I wasn't happy. And I was like, what's going on? So it kind of like made that reset. But I agree with you. There's a lot of people that get caught up, maybe they've got generational wealth or, newly found wealth. That you get caught up and start thinking that you're better than somebody else. And, then oftentimes not great things happen for everybody. One of the things I think from my humble beginnings is regardless of my success, I always believe I'm no better than anybody else and nobody's any better than me.
And I picked that up learning about you, and which I think is incredible. And that's one of the things that I've seen I've had the great fortune to interview people like Doug Conant, Stephen M.R. Covey, all of these great leaders. Mm-hmm. And so many of them are humble. And you would never know that they've had the success that they had. And that's one of the things my dad would always say. He'd always say, like, look, the people who have to brag about the money or what they have, they're either super insecure or just BSing, because the true leaders want to give back. But I got a question for you. Look, there's a lot of smart people. What did Bud see in you that made him want to go all in backing you?
That's a good question. So I'll reverse engineer. I think what he saw is he saw somebody who was driven, who was hardworking, and I think honest. I don't know if people approach you. People approach me sometimes to do angel investing, and I've done it, not done it. But, there's a lot of people out there that look at investors as a means to an end versus this is someone that trusted me with their capital. And I need to do a really good job taking care of that and really trying to grow it. And I think that's just the difference in, I think many people's perspective on that.
And can you walk us through a little bit more on the web.com story? Because, you went from 0 to 200.
Yeah. Well, it's a fun story, I'll tell you, because that's how I got to Atlanta. So, go back in the Wayback Machine for a moment. I was in South Florida, and I was very convinced, because back then, when you think about web hosting, this is before cloud computing and virtual machines and all those type of things. So it's kind of bare metal, which is funny. With AI, we're almost getting back to bare metal. But I started a business, and we went from like the first month, we did $50,000 in revenue. And I had some partners, and I said, well, I want to give equity to the employees and this and that. And they go like, we're not going to give equity to anybody. It's just equity for the three of us. And given the experience I had told you, I'm a big believer, like I want to give everybody a chance. Doesn't mean it's going to work, right? But I'm going to give everybody a chance. And so they said, well, we'll buy you out or you buy us out. And I said, great. You could do the exact same business or I'll do the exact same business. They bought me out. And at that point, all of South Florida, the internet connection was 45 megs. So you think about that, like what we have in our house these days, the entire internet connection. So I moved to Atlanta because it had the lowest cost of living and the highest density in internet backbone. And this goes back to, you've seen this in a lot of entrepreneurial stories. I think I'd saved like $150,000, $170,000. And I took in my entire savings, rented half a floor in downtown Atlanta, and started this web hosting business, which originally was called Interland, became web.com. And, oftentimes when I would hire, it'd be congratulations, there's your box and a desk, here's a screwdriver, and let's get started. Which again, many times you have that when you're scrambling for money. And and I was just blessed to get some really great people. We had a really young, energetic team. We believe we can do it. We fought really big competitors, and experienced lots of things. I remember like going, for example, to when I was ready doing my VC round. I was in New York City, and the executive team that I put around me were probably twice my age. So I was the young whippersnapper. And I remember doing a presentation. The VC looked at me and said, "Kid, what are you really saying?" I said, "Bottom line, every business is going to run their business on the internet." He looked at me and said, "Kid, do you believe your bullshit?" And this is a place where there is $10 million pictures on the wall. And that goes back to like when you're an entrepreneur and you're really going for it. Or, I'd say even if you're seen as an executive, you're not an entrepreneur, but, having a vision and having, being open to being wrong, but having the conviction to keep moving forward, obviously constantly, changing patterns, directions based upon feedback. So that was a great experience. It was also a tough experience because we went public after the .com crash. I got to experience all the great things. I got to experience all the tough things. We merged it to web.com and merged it with Micron PC and created web.com. So it was still a really amazing experience.
Yeah, I lived through the .com days here in San Francisco, and you saw the ups and the downs. And what do you think is one big mistake that, there's a lot of mistakes, but that a lot of the founders and the internet companies made in the .com days?
Well, it might be the same as the AI days right now. Similar. And what I would say is, I think that when you got to be careful when you put a bunch of high performing people that are really, really smart, sometimes young, sometimes not young. But if you're not careful, you can build an organization that's close to feedback. They're kind of
know-it-alls.
Right, the know-it-alls, and they almost then become protective of their position on the team versus like, hey, it's okay. Like they'd always say like, it's okay to be wrong, but really embracing like, I don't know anything. And so like, when I think about my career, in the last, 8 years, in some cases, I've been the seasoned executive partnering with young entrepreneurs. And the right young entrepreneurs are like, hey, I want to bring somebody in because that's going to accelerate my learning curve. And there's many things I know. Doesn't mean I'm going to abandon my beliefs because I've got this guy that has experience, but I want to learn. I'm looking to short circuit and, hack the learning curve that I might have otherwise. Whereas I've seen other companies, like there was a time not too long ago with the COO that they had a business that went from 4 to 24 to like 50 million. And it was clear to me that they didn't see the problems that they had, and they were just going to be blind to it. And so it was like one where I was like, I've seen this show many times. I'll pass.
Now, when you run into that challenge with entrepreneurs or founders, is it a generational thing? So, for instance, is it the younger generations who seem to be, I don't want to say maybe, entitled and know-it-all versus somebody in their 40s who's a founder, first-time founder? Or is it across the board that you run into people who aren't open to feedback or less likely open to feedback?
That's right. I think it's really probably experience and confidence in yourself. If you're very confident in yourself and you've seen, that you're not always right, and that's okay. Maybe you want to be mostly right. Amazon has that thing. We want to hire people that are mostly right. But I think that if you're okay with, I'm going to make mistakes, and you embrace that, that's good. And I've seen that, old, young, I don't think it matters. Like when I think about myself, the 20-something-year-old, I remember like hiring somebody again that was probably twice my age, and like what was very simple to me, I wasn't getting. He was explaining, and I think about if I would have been, I would have been like, he doesn't know quite what he's talking about, and I do. And I like to feel like generally, though, I would, oh, well, I'm probably wrong. Let me go listen. But, I think age certainly plays into it, especially if you haven't had a lot of experience.
What's interesting is I interviewed Richard White, who's the founder of Fathom, a great note-taking. And he is a very humble, open guy. But one of the things that he recommended for founders to be careful of is not always take whatever somebody with super experience says as gospel, because sometimes they're not always right.
Yep. That's right. And I think that's the part is you're not always right. They're not always right. No one has the magic bullet. And that's where I get a lot more into what does the data say? Because, I've been in tons of meetings. I've seen tons of companies where, there's a board meeting, there's an executive meeting, and they've got a ton of KPIs or they're sending out a report, ton of KPIs. And I was like, if there's a ton of KPIs, it's usually useless. And if there's no targets, why are we bothering? And so I'm a big believer, the way to solve some of those things is that a data informed position that there's a thing that someone's sharing with me, or is it just a routine that they learned, a playbook they learned a long time ago? That's what they know. And so, it looks like the right approach for this. And they just kind of rinse, repeat, which oftentimes it's not the right thing. So for example, I've gone into Series A companies and I could put a ton of structure because I was at Cox and, that $3 billion systems and, all those kind of things. But, one of the things I pride myself is I try to put the right amount of structure for the company at that size. Whereas there's plenty of people that, every time they come in, they're going to put the exact same level of infrastructure. And if somebody doesn't know, then they might go with that. And then you could really harm your business. I would say even like as a young entrepreneur, I hired some people from Bell South because back then, you couldn't find anybody that had hosting or internet, any of those kind of things. And maybe some of the things, the feedback I got, probably I shouldn't have listened to as much. So I do think that's a really good feedback is listen to what they're saying, look and see if there's data that supports it, and then be open to maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but then make a decision. Because the biggest I've seen is when people go and they waffle and they go this way and that way, is a decision almost always trumps a pause. So I think that's the better way to handle it.
So you got to take action eventually, look at it. And I also like what you're saying, but I am curious when you say that sometimes they have too many KPIs and they're worthless. Why do you think that is? Because you're trying to measure too many different things?
Yes, I think people are trying to measure. Oftentimes, I go back to this thing I call it outcomes over activity. There's a lot of time where people are really busy doing things. And so to justify that the things they're doing, we must measure it. So we're going to be data informed. And so people start measuring it. But does it really matter? And so you don't have to use, I've seen OKRs be used incredibly wrong in many cases, but I do like critical thinking frameworks because you think about it, there's probably really only like 6 or 7 key things we're trying to accomplish and we can measure those. And if we can accomplish those things, then lots of other things happen magically, if that makes sense.
Can you give an example of, measuring activity over results? I think you talked about this with the guys at Course Dog.
Well, I could do Course Dog, but let me do a New Relic example.
Okay.
I used to fly out to San Francisco, and New Relic, great company, reported to Lou Cern, who founded that and kind of built the observability platform. But in that case, I started off in one role and then started running product. And the product leader came to me and they said, "Hey, we want to have a team to invest in this service to create an API for," I'll call it open metrics. And I'm going to get too technical in here, but basically start off where you're going to install an agent on a server. As time went on, people are using Kubernetes and using all these things. And so they wanted to pull in all of that extra data. So the team came to me and said, I forgot the amount, let's call it $3 million. Want to have this team, we're going to stand it up for X amount of time where it's going to be $3 million. And I said, great. So what's success? And, success is we build the API. And I said, well, you guys know I'm not that kind of success. So what are we trying to accomplish? And they're like, okay, well, people are going to use it. And I'm like, okay, great. Well, how much people are going to, how much traffic are we going to put on it? And they said, I forgot a number, like a low number. I said, okay, well, how much revenue that would be? And I don't remember the exact number, but let's say we're going to generate $50,000 in revenue and spend $3 million. I'm like, does that make sense? And again, just asking those questions. So then finally got to the point where they had a compelling case where they're going to do X amount and it made sense financially. I can't remember, let's call it a couple $1 million in revenue. It's like, okay, that's a great ROI for that investment. And it was funny. I knew, I kind of asked those probing questions to let them get to that answer themselves. And I knew when they walked out of the office, they were going to come back. It's like the next day they go like, wait, to hit those metrics, we can't just do an API. We actually have to do integrations with this, that, and the other thing. And I said, makes sense. Now, when they started that whole process, I was pretty confident that's what they had to do, but I wanted them to get through that process. And so the key point is I set a goal as what's the business outcome we're trying to achieve by all of these things in a measurable way. And if we can align on that, it forced a lot of other things. Like, for example, one of the things they did too is I said, when are we going to get this done by? It was like 6 months after launch. They go, well, to do that, we're going to have to train the sales force. And as you know, like a lot of times fast moving companies, that's one of the challenges. They go build something really quick, but they forgot how to train the sales force on how to sell it. And so then that's more of a delay. So the key would be is if you get focused on what's the business outcome of what we're doing, because everything we're doing in the company, we should be able to articulate some sort of targeted business outcome. And then everything, all the activities should be driving towards that. To your point, where I see that there's activities, I got this project, I got this thing's going on, this activity, I'm meeting with lots of customers, we're handling lots of tickets. Okay, that's great. So we're busy, we're doing lots of activity, but how do we know that that's good?
I think one of the key points that you said in there, which is very important for leaders at all levels, is asking open-ended probing questions and listening and not jumping in and trying and answering those questions for them, because they're not going to learn that way. And you kind of want to lead them to the answers they're coming to, right? But you don't want to get there for them. It's got to click for them.
Yeah, and as a leader, like a mental model, I think asking those open-ended questions, being honestly curious about what they're saying, being open to that maybe you have a perspective that's very strong, but maybe you're totally wrong, and listen to them. Because a lot of times I've seen leaders that, they're fast thinking, we've got a lot of answers in our head, and you could shut people down. And what that does is then just makes everybody come to you for answers.
And you're the bottleneck. And I see that quite a bit. I have a lot of buddies or just people I know who are like that, fast thinking. A lot of times they're super product based, and they don't understand sales, marketing, logistics, anything. And it's hard to kind of crack the nut to get them to open up and understand. Do you have any recommendations for how people like that can be, let's say, more self-aware?
Well, that's a good question. I think the practicing of asking open-ended questions, think about like there's the thing of coaching, but like if you think about it, your job is to coach, other team members so that they can get to that scale. I was just thinking, I've got something, let me see if I have it here. I don't know if you've seen this, but like the Matrix, I'll just go back to, when I think about a lot of times CEOs, like you're challenging yourself to be the best. So like maybe you think you're a high performer, you want your team to be high performers. But I've got this little matrix that I've done over time where, I'll just share it with you, see if it's helpful for anybody out there. But, think about low performers, right, in your organizations. Oftentimes their mindset, in my mind, is why should I care? They're disconnected, disengaged. And a lot of times people think, oh, that's okay. It's a low performer. That's not a great job. No, they actually destroy trust and culture in your organization. So like to me is like when you have a low performer, you got to move them out. Performers, what's the minimum I need to do? High performers, and this is the part of blood this, they're competitive, they're driven, I want to win. And then here's what I would just say, and this goes back to a little bit, ties into your coaching question. You call it mega performers, meta performers, but I think there's like a level above high performer. And if you're going back to, this is a way I think as a CEO or anybody, you could challenge yourself. Like I want to be a meta performer, which means not only am I going to win, I'm going to bring the people around me to that higher level too. And the only way you're going to do that is to ask them the probing questions to help them grow. And so that's where I would say, like a lot of times I think we're all competitive, from a success and like, I want to be a high performer. Like, what if you just say, hey, one step beyond that is I'm going to bring the rest of the team. Cause then, the only way you're going to bring the team is if you get them to think differently.
And so what I hear you saying is, okay, low performers, they need to go. Because, and I think it's Frank Slootman who said it in his book, Amp Up, which is a great book. Mm-hmm. your responsibility as a founder, as a leader, is to put an elite team on the field at all times. And you shouldn't tolerate the low performers. But if you want to become a meta performer, you need to elevate everybody up around you. It's not just about how great you are, because sometimes you can even become the bottleneck. And that reminds me of, I also had on my show Keith Ferrazzi, Never Lead Alone. And he talks about, going from leadership to teamship. And that's where you boost everybody up, and they start holding each other accountable, giving each other feedback, and really taking the whole team to the next level.
I agree. I think it's like, how far can I go and how many people can I bring with me? And that's one of the things that, like, these days, like when I'm involved with things, a big part of it is the people part. Like, I love it when I get to leverage some of my experience, and I don't come in like I know the answer. I think about, like, let's ask those questions. And it's amazing where I've seen, so like I had, one with two 25-year-old Columbia grad executives, and, just asking the questions, seeing them grow, because they were Columbia grads. They'd built this startup. It was doing well. But, I said, like, let's ask questions. And as they started to see their team thinking on their own and the business moving without input in every single step from them, they realized the power of doing that.
Now, when you go and look at whether you're going to invest in a startup or, I don't know,
invest my time, capital, whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you look at the product that they have in front of them, or is it the actual people behind the product in case that product doesn't work out?
Well, that's a great story. So I'll tell you my personal view, but I'll also tell you like an interesting discovery. So one time I was in San Francisco and I happened to meet Bill Gurley at Benchmark. And I think you and I were talking a little about the story. But at that point, Zillow really was just floundering. It wasn't what it is today. And I was curious because, like, Benchmark has a reputation of just like, it seems like, constantly winning. Like, they just have a lot of really big home runs. And I said, Bill, I'm just curious, like, what made you invest in the Zillow team? And he's like, it was the full Expedia team. And we have confidence at Benchmark. If somebody has a generally good idea, in that case, we're going to disrupt the real estate buying market. And we have a great team and they have access to capital. They will, I remember him telling me this, they will pivot until they figure it out.
And that's what it is, right? They're just going to keep going. I mean,
right.
Not going to sit back. They're going to keep going and take action. It's funny, a good buddy of mine, Damon, who started For Sale by Owner, Zillow wanted to bring him on board for almost the same reason. They saw that he had the resilience to keep going.
Yeah.
And he wasn't into it after he sold his business, but that's what I did. I love that story that you talked about that.
Yeah. And what I will say though, is like when people are valuing whether it be investment or, again, the investment of our time. Because if you think about it, that's the most valuable thing we have to invest because we only get that once, right? But when I think about evaluating it, it's, first of all, I think it's the idea. Is this an idea that's going to happen and someone's going to figure it out? Because then it's just a matter of us, and then is this the right time for that idea? Because I've seen many great ideas that are too late, too early. And then it's the people around it. I think that final part. But if you have a bad idea, really just totally off market, that's where it's really tough to come back from, in my experience. And so I've seen, I've unfortunately seen and done some like cleanup on turnarounds and things like that, where somebody had, in some cases a great idea with bad execution, but if you have a bad idea, and you haven't really figured out that product market fit, then it's really, really challenging to get there. You might still get there, but it's a tough role. So these days, when I think about evaluating my time, is do I believe that this business has the potential to be a really big business? That's one of the first things that I think about. Do I think that, with execution, we can get to really big business? So these days I kind of start past product market fit. So it's more of an execution game. And then are these the people that I trust and would enjoy going on that journey with?
I want to get to AI in a moment, but so you were sitting in a room one day and some guy in New York told you that you're full of bullshit.
Yeah.
Have you ever been in a situation where maybe you didn't say it out loud, but you were thinking about that, somebody's idea, and you completely missed it and they proved you wrong, and they, let's say you passed on them, but then they absolutely crushed it?
Yes and no. I'll give you the best one, and I got to remember. I think is it X stock? What's the one that's the shoe trading platform? StockX, I think it is.
Okay, yeah.
So True Life is a friend of a friend or whatever introduced me to this guy. He sat down with me and he said, "We're going to build this platform, and people are going to upload, and they're going to trade these $500,000, sneakers." And I just didn't get it. Now, I will say, so I didn't invest. It probably still would have been a bad investment because they had to have because the other part, if you're an investor in a business, you got to understand how much capital it takes. Because you could be, going back to timing, you could be in a thing that's going to be big, but you got so diluted that even can happen to entrepreneurs that you didn't get anything from it. So I think they raised so much capital that wouldn't have been a good financial investment. But that business idea turned out, I think they ended up selling the business for like $1 billion. And that's a good example going back to being wrong. So now I'm very open to, I tell people this, I'm like, hey, here's my opinion, but I may be totally wrong. If you feel really passionately that this is the thing you should be doing, then go forth and do it. And I give them examples of, whether it be I'm wrong or other people will tell them. And this, like there's doubters when you're starting a business, you doubt yourself. And so you have to power through those things.
Yeah, you have to believe that the vision you have can work, because there's plenty of doubters out there around it. Now, we both lived, pivoting over to this conversation, we both lived through the .com days, the internet. Mm-hmm. And we talked a little bit about AI. But how do you think the two compare? Do you think, are we heading into something similar to the internet, or is it far going to exceed what the internet's done for us?
Magnitudes more. And magnitudes more disruptive in every single part of our society. I'm sure you use ChatGPT and Claude. I use ChatGPT and Claude. Like, it's already saving us a ton of time. You think about software development. I do some consulting with private equity firms. When they have their developers truly embrace AI, for every 3 developers, they get basically another developer's worth of output versus before. So I think that AI is going to be so transformative in every part of our life. The scary thing about AI is, and of course, you think about like the PC is going to change everything. That was a big deal. Everybody thought the world might end with that. It didn't. The internet's going to destroy a lot of things. It didn't. AI is going to be an interesting one because it's so transformative. And the part that I don't worry, but I'll just say is like, who knows what happens is if, what they call actual general intelligence, where it can, because right now all AI is derivative. Like a lot of people think like, oh, it comes up with creative new ideas. No, every single thing it's done is derivative. There was a study, I think it was Colgate-Palmolive, where they put their executives together and said, we're going to build a new adjacency to, I think it was a toothpaste. And they sent the executives off with AI to go build the plan. And 80% of what they came back with was the exact same thing. Because again, AI is very derivative of all the works that are created. If actual general intelligence, where AI can create new thoughts that didn't exist, then who knows what's going to happen.
I think we're a ways off from that, though.
I agree with you. There's some people that say it's 5 years away. I think there's probably more to us as human beings and original thought than some of the doomsayers are giving credit to.
I do believe that it's going to eliminate a lot of white collar jobs that are redundant, where the work's redundant. I mean, if you're in that type of field, it's time to go upskill somewhere. Right.
It's going to be a great time for many people are going to say, service industry, especially like technical, like HVAC, there's certain segments that I think are not going to be impacted, other than it's going to be easier for them to get and maintain customers so they could just focus on delivering great service. But I agree, middle management, I think for development, engineering, product, a lot, it's going to drive a tremendous amount of efficiency because what AI is great is taking all the data and giving you that true signal of where should we go, whether it be what product we should do, what the sales teams, what's really going on with the sales teams, why we're really losing deals. It's going to be pretty impactful. And then you wonder about, like, even on the service business, I'm sure you see restaurants where, they've got some, bot that's bringing your delivery from the back to the bar, and then the person's handing that to you. You've seen ChatGPT, how great the voice communication is now. So I think you're going to see lots of automation in all parts of the business. So I'm a big believer that humans are dynamic, and we'll figure out new jobs, but it's going to be disruptive. I think it's going to be very disruptive.
I was going through with my family In and Out yesterday, and you know how the guy comes on and he says, what would you like to order? And I was thinking to myself, how long is that job going to last?
Yeah.
Before you start talking to an AI agent or something where they just program, they know the patterns of the questions to ask.
Well, true life story. I was with a friend. I think they were in San Francisco. I think it was, they went to Burger King and they placed an order, and it was conversational. And it was 100% AI. It got that. So when they got to the window, the friend's like, "Hey, I don't want to take away your jobs. Are the orders pretty and accurate?" They go, "Oh no, actually the orders have been more accurate than they've ever been." Because you think about AI in a conversation, can know all of the options and be very consistent of giving you, like, do you want pickles on that? Do you want mustard, or whatever the details for the things you can order? But they had 100% drive-through voice ordering system, and so the only thing that people were doing in the restaurant was handing the food out and obviously making it.
So are you spending your time working with a lot of AI companies or considering different ventures to find the different trends where people could be really successful?
Yeah, well, I do love AI and have done. So I've been actually, a lot of people think that AI just happened 2 years ago. I've been doing AI for 7 years, right? Back when I was at New Relic, and New Relic's like software that monitors software. So you think about, like, if you go to Disney, you got the Disney app. Used to be like sometimes it wouldn't work. Well, if you notice, your apps generally work better, websites generally. That's because behind the scenes, there's data being captured. If you have a bad experience, they're sent to things like New Relic, AppD, or whatever. And so we had all of that data coming at New Relic, and we thought, there's a lot of false positives. So we used AI to build anomaly detection. So we were able to say, here's the needle, here's something starting to fail before it totally fell over. And now that's, very common. I was at another company called Blameless, which behind the scenes, when software breaks, you think about like when Taylor Swift breaks Ticketmaster, that was one of our customers. There's a lot of things that have to go on. People have to be communicated and talk. And so behind the scenes, there might be a lot of, we're troubleshooting technically in a Slack channel. And so we used AI to grab all of that data and summarize everything that had happened. So when someone would join to help fix it, instead of spending 15 minutes figuring out what had happened prior to them joining, they would get a very succinct, detailed, here's what's happening, here's the things that have been tried, blah, 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 so that they would be more effective in solving problems. And it led to, a dramatic, like a 50% reduction in some companies' time to fix software when it broke, because everybody's communicating better. So most recently, I did a company called Product Genius that is using AI for SMBs. So going back to like retail locations, there's a lot of data if you can communicate with your customer. So a lot of times, one of the features is, how was the experience? But instead of like 5-star NPS score answering questions, you just say the service was great. The service was great, but the bathroom was dirty, or whatever it is you want to do, and you got rewards and so forth. But we were able to take that AI data and actually tell business owners, on Thursdays, you have a staffing problem in the bar. You just hired somebody who's great, FYI, you just hired somebody who's not doing great. And so it really short-circuited. And so what business owners would tell us, what they would figure out in 2 or 3 months, they were figuring out in 1 to 2 weeks.
And it kind of goes back to what you're saying about making data-driven decisions as well. Because if you get clean data to work with and examples, then you could start focusing in on some of those challenges to, make them better and move forward.
Yeah, and I think that's what you'll see, because before, there's a lot of things where, going back to those KPIs, we're monitoring a lot of stuff, but it's not really giving insights into our business. And so I think what AI is really good is taking even more data, mashing it all together and giving you a true signal. Like, for example, in B2B SaaS, a lot of times, there's a product person and they've got the product idea, and the salesperson's got an idea, and the customers have idea, and tech support seeing something else. And so that usually, creates a lot of friction and inefficiency. What I'm seeing companies now is you could take all of the different data points, put it into one data set, have AI, and it actually would tell you the clear patterns. Here's what's causing our customers pain. Here's the features that we're winning on. Here's the feature gaps that we're losing on. And it's no longer a debate or an opinion. It's data.
And I've seen, I mean, we could sit here and talk examples all day long, especially out here in San Francisco with people leveraging AI. But I've seen studies that show that there's still less than 10, 15% of companies are actually taking advantage or using AI. If you're a business owner and you're not leveraging AI, but you want to get started with it, where would be the first place you would start?
Well, I would go for the easy win. So if simple things like if you have a software development, that's an easy win for AI. It's really good at it. If you have repetitive customer service, you see some of these agentic agents, they can do a really good job with that, but it's not replacing the people, but it's really probably frontlining it. So, 80% of it, I've seen ones where 70% of the questions could get answered by AI, and then it automatically reverts to a person for that other 30%. So what I would say is structurally, here's the best way to do it. And this is what I coach like private equity owned companies is get your leadership team together, get somebody that knows a little bit about AI, because not everybody's going to know about what the potential capability are. Let's kind of educate everybody. Here's what it is. Let me show you what prompt writing is, what's coming. And this I'd say on the smaller side, and I'll talk about enterprise in a second. And then challenge the leadership team. Where's some quick wins? Let's all go think about our different parts of our business and see if there's some quick wins. And I've seen people come back with contract reviews, reducing their legal expenses by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Customer service, of course, development, those are big things. Surveys, getting more detailed in the survey, so maybe you can have open-ended questions and then compute what that feedback is. So are your employees happy? Are your customers happy? Those would be some of the things that I see off the top. I think for bigger enterprises, I think there's still a lot of questions around value because again, you and I have both seen the how it hallucinates, it makes up things if we're not careful. And so it's a soft answer versus hard answer. We're used to building systems that are very discrete and definitive and have, if you put in A, you get B on the output. That's not what you get with AI. And so I think there's a lot of people looking and evaluating E&Y might say we should go spend, $5 million to go build a custom trained model on our data set, but is that really valuable? And so what I would just challenge everybody to be, before you go on to those multi-million dollar or tens of $1 million, be clear, is this a good application for where the technology is today? Because in many cases, it's not. And you see people like, I think Klarna is a great example where they fired their entire customer service team, went all on AI, and then had to revert.
Yeah, a friend of mine went to an HR conference recently where an organization did just that. They got rid of all their HR generalists, implemented AI, and it completely fell apart. So, I mean, they went too far in one direction and seeing. And I think a lot of this will get there, but right now, a lot of it, some works, some doesn't. And I think it's just going to be over time. And I like what you're saying, getting small wins are important. And that helps drive buy-in like any change initiative as well.
Yeah, and I would say as an individual and as a skill set, I think prompt writing is a skill set that people should develop because I'm sure you've probably done it. As you get better at prompt writing, you can get better output, whether you're using it from a personal exercise or even your team's using it for, again, contract reviews. That's a fantastic use case for many companies.
I mean, for a small business like Learnit, it helps democratize the field, really, because it allows us to compete with organizations. We don't have a full legal team. I mean, if we could do the first 2 drafts. Obviously, I'm not going to do it by myself, but at the end of the day, it will save a ton of hours. And same thing goes for marketing and sales and everything else. I mean, I just think that you have to look at things now. You have to be curious and say, what's the possibility and how can I make this better by leveraging AI?
No, I totally agree. I think it levels the field versus enterprises. And I'll just go back to a point. One of the things that's pretty interesting, there's a lot of private equity. As you know, a lot of times there's a subset of private equity that buys an asset, figures out what's the minimal they can invest because it's a niche product. and it kind of like does okay, and people pay it because it solves the issue, and it's great. But what we're seeing is increasingly, sometimes it's coming from overseas, sometimes it's coming here, is with AI, you can build applications so much faster. So what they're seeing is some of these cases where they've built like a nice niche 30, 60, $90 million a year business. Somebody's coming in going AI first for the whole thing and knocking it out. A recent example, there was a company, private equity, or actually it was venture owned in this case, been around like 10 years for property management for apartments. Nice cash flow business, been around for a while. Somebody said, we're just going to AI apartment management, every single aspect of apartment management. They were able to raise $200 million. And now competitively, they're really doing damage, against all these legacy players. So I think embrace AI is important. And especially if you've got a legacy business, you got to realize that leveling of the field also means that what might have cost $20 million to compete with you, someone might be able to compete with $3 million.
And what I hear you saying, which is incredibly important, is, yeah, you don't know who's going to disrupt you anymore. It could come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be a big player. It could be somebody in their basement working on something because they could raise a little bit of money or just do it on their own and come out of nowhere. So you always have to be aware of what's going on.
Yeah, that obstacle and cash has come down dramatically. And you're seeing, again, I'll give you another example. Like, if you've heard of no code, so there's solutions that have been around for 10, 15 years that, like WYSIWYG, and you don't have to write code. Those companies are getting crushed because, again, AI has made it so easy for you just to ask the question and build software faster organically.
No, it's going to be an interesting world. And Ken, kind of wrap it up here. What do you think the future of leadership is going to be like in, let's say, 5 years from now, with the introduction of AI, even like AI employees into your organization?
Well, call me a purist. I still think it's going to be based upon, leaders that people get excited about the vision. I think that you might have technology, you might have that, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a leader or leaders that cast a vision and get a group of, if it's a startup, right, get a group of people excited on that mission. Because I've seen it time and time again where you have no capital, and I'm a great example. Like, with $150,000, I built a $200 million business, and I didn't have the insider connections. I didn't have I figured it out. And so I think when you have people that have vision, I still think that's going to be very consistent, that they can go really far. And what's nice with AI, I think that the ground floor and the chance for them to build something substantial is really fairer than it's ever been. And I've seen again, I met this guy, had a $6 million a year business, never raised a dime of capital. It's him and 3 people. They use AI. It's like a WordPress plugin. He loves his life. It's a good thing.
It is a good thing. And it's inspiring for our listeners out there who want to go out and start their own thing. And maybe they didn't believe in themselves enough, or they thought the field was unfair. And what I hear you saying, which I totally agree with, is now the possibilities could even be unlimited. Just get out there and try and move forward and go for things.
Yeah. And I'll just add, I think for the people in the audience, I always say, because I get this question a lot, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I would say if you're younger, 20s and 30s, take a lot of risk. You have plenty of time to correct. Because I have seen, I don't know if you've had some friends that maybe like, hey, at 45, now is when I want to be an entrepreneur. And if you're not careful, like, you can blow up your marriage, blow up your finances, a lot of different things. You have a lot more to lose. So, when you're young and you have a lot more time, I say take a ton of risk.
I'm totally with you on that. I mean, just be smart enough. I call it purposeful awfulizing. Look at, like, what is the worst case scenario in a year from now? And if you could overcome that, go for it, because that's a lot better going for it and failing and learning than passing up that opportunity and, 10 years down the line, wishing you would have done something.
I totally agree. And I know we both know this, but just for anybody that's in their 20s, 30s, you will learn more at a failed startup in 1 to 2 years than 10 or 20 years at a Fortune 500.
Absolutely. And you're almost better off failing up front than having a lower win early on and turning into that know-it-all mentality where you think you're a genius. Because you can learn so much from failure. Ken, this has been awesome. I want to recap some of the things we talked about. We talked about, when you become inspired to become an entrepreneur, things change over time. What was important to you at one stage of your career could be different later on. And everybody has their own view of what happiness looks like. And it's not only money. Money just gives you options. And we talked about what works for startups and why some fail, and how it's important to have a beginner's mind or a learn-it-all mentality to being open to being wrong, and how important it is to have data-driven decisions and really focus on outcomes over activities. What's one more thing you want to leave the listeners with before we go?
Well, I'll just add with the data is data with no targets is not good data. So to me is if you're just looking at something, it's an interesting data point, but how you run your business, all that data, you should have a target and a goal. So that way everybody's driving it. And again, if you have more than 7, at the highest leadership, I think you're looking at too many things.
Great point. Where can everybody connect with you at?
If you want to learn personally, I've got a blog post where I try to share some of these thoughts. KenGavranovic.com, KenGavranovic.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can also email me, Ken@KenGavranovic. If there's anything I could do to help you, I'm a big believer in paying it forward. You never know how one conversation might help somebody else. So I love to do that. And I'm blessed that other people have done that for me.
Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation today, Ken. I mean, for somebody who's been as successful as you are and humble and willing to give back, I really appreciate that. And for our listeners out there, first of all, I'm going to put obviously all these links in the show notes so you can get it there. What I'd like you to do is think about somebody who maybe struggles to believe in themselves or has an idea but hasn't made that effort and gone for it. Send them this conversation. I think you're going to get a lot of great value out of this. And until next time, everybody, stay curious, keep learning, and have a great day. See ya. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Damon. Take care.
It's a lot easier to trust people than not to trust them. I trusted people completely, and it worked out for me. I mean, a lot of people it doesn't work out for. People will cheat you and so forth and so on, but I find that's the best thing you could do